All right. Well, welcome everybody for our first installment of our artist talks for our exhibition Please Stay Home, hosted by the Seattle Residency Project. My name is Connor, and I am one of the artists in residence with the Seattle Residency Project. And thank you all so much for being here. I wanted to introduce you to Cassie, which is to my left, at least on my screen. I don't know where she is on anybody else's screens, but she is one of our resident artists here based in Seattle. Her interdisciplinary work is based in new media, poetry, and performance, plays with human interaction, and denatures gendered experience. Her current body of work explores queer motherhood. She is co-curator of Failure to Conform, a 2018 Idea Fund recipient project that spotlighted national and local trans, genderqueer, intersex, and gender nonconforming writers, performers, and visual arts in Houston, Texas. Everybody, welcome Cassie to tell us more about her work titled Die Sonderlingische.
Thanks, Connor, for that introduction. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it myself because I'm still learning Dutch, but that was a good attempt. I think it's Die Sonderlingische. I think the J is a Y sound, but that's the title of my work for this show. Please stay at home. I'm glad we're all at home. And the title I chose for this work was it means queer or the weirdos or something like that if you look it up. And in studying the Dutch language, I've discovered that that people tend to speak in the diminutive when they speak to each other as an informal speech pattern. So this is the diminutive form of the word weirdo. And I find the poetry that I was creating for this project, they're little poems called Elfjes, which is a poetry form that is taught to young children in Holland or the Netherlands. And I started working with Elfjes as originally as like a way to respond to the sculptural work that I had been making. I have a daily practice of, or sometimes during the year, I have a daily practice of creating assemblages, and sometimes they're altars, sometimes they're characters in a scene, all kinds of different experiments. And I started writing little tiny poems to describe what's going on in an obscure way. And I like the Elfje form because it's only 11 words. You only get 11 words to work with, so you have to be really clear and dense if you want to say anything meaningful or and I think when I'm meditating on looking at a piece of sculpture, that it's not always clear what's going on. And in this project, when I'm working on anything, I tend to meditate while I'm working on it. So I'll pick a theme to meditate while I'm making assemblages. And this time I wasn't I was making the poems first. I guess that would be the change that I went through in my process. Is instead of making a sculpture first, I started with writing poems. But I limited myself to words that were being played in Scrabble games that I've been playing with people online. Yeah, and it was an interesting process because there was only ever about between 40 and 50 words to begin with, and they were very they're not always words that people use every day. So I found that to be a great tool to find more interesting words to work with. The Scrabble games. Um, but while I was assembling them, I was thinking about queer motherhood and what that means to um, to exist as a parent of children and experience nurturing children, and what that means to nurture them from a distance, as we're doing right now. Um, so after I created the poems, I still wanted to respond to them in much the same way that I was responding to the sculptural work. So I made little images that are derivatives the of the poems. So each of the images that are paired with the Elphias are um, an expression of the poem. And in that way, the image becomes a child and the poem is a parent. And I feel like that is a relationship I can understand of what it means to be a mother, is and the especially a queer mother. So yeah, that's how I came about making this work, and I had some thoughts about if you're not familiar with the Elfia form, it is the first line is typically a property or a color. And I was very fortunate that almost all of the games that I played in Scrabble had something that related to color in them. So I was able to start the poems mostly that way. And then the second line is 2 words long. It's supposed to describe the color or be an object that the color receives. The third line describes more. You only get 3 words. And it's still supposed to be descriptive of the object. And the fourth line is an inward reflection, something about yourself that relates to the object. And then finally, the very last word is called the bomb. And it's supposed to be a succinct or startling word that encapsulates all 4 of the previous lines. And that's what the general form of the Elfia is about. Sometimes I would switch the role of the third and the fourth line. So sometimes, like I find that I only need 3 words to put myself in the relationship to the object in the poem, and sometimes I need 4. It just depends on what is speaking to me at the time. So, does anyone have any questions?
Why did you choose the process of the Scrabble game? And how is that related to queer motherhood? Or is it?
Um, I don't think it's directly related to queer motherhood, but it's definitely symbiotic to how we're existing in the world today. And like many of the interactions I have with other people involve either meeting on Zoom or playing games. That seems to be how people want to socialize online, and and being a parent, you often need to get words from other folks and how to do things. I think parenting is always a collaborative process, so it's just a little bit metaphorical to needing or just communicating with others to bring an outside view into the work.
Hey, I know you already touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious about this relationship of like physical and digital, and how like even using a digital Scrabble or like versus physical Scrabble game, and then creating this piece as a physical piece on something you can hold versus having it on technology. And I'm just interested in like hearing more about that relationship, about what it was like to create this specifically for a digital space.
Oh, I wanted to make sure that it fit on a screen, so that was definitely a consideration. But I actually made these pieces considering it to be printed first. And the screen was a bit secondary. I have I have a sample of a printout here. This is an earlier version. But let me see. Is the background gonna interfere? Oh, that doesn't work. Wait, where do I? Wait, there we go. I need to put it in front of me. There we go. So, so this was where I started. I was printing on these index cards, and I want to have a physical object in the end, and I feel like this is going to be turned into a postcard, so that I could. I always have difficulty with sending letters, like physical letters, and I have been receiving letters from you all, which is really sweet, and I appreciate it. So I think I was trying to conceive of a way that I could be more thoughtful in sending postcards. So I'm on the way to turning these into postcards as well, that I could then send to people I care about, people I have all sorts of relationships with.
Another quick thought / question about that it just struck me when you were showing that, about the relationship of mother and child and birthing of the image in the poem, whereas on the physical representation there's a hierarchy of the mother being over the child, and on the digital representation there's more of an equality of the mother and child next to each other. And I just thought that was like a really interesting thing, and also how that intersects with like queer mothering and this idea of how hierarchy falls within that.
I have thought about it. It's mostly afterthoughts about what resulted, and the way that websites shrink down your work to fit on smaller and smaller screens. So, and this is an interesting take on parenthood. When we have like a large amount of screen real estate, there's more resources available. Like relationships tend towards equality. But when like resources become strained, like on the phone, the works do actually fall so that the image is under the text in that parent-child relationship. So I thought that was an interesting talk, like something that arose out of making it that is not intentional, but I very much enjoy. So like we tend to treat each other much better when resources are plentiful. But once they're restrained, like people fall into hierarchy and me first, you second type relationships. Or like in a parent-child relationship, often like us parents are funneling resources to our children first and taking things ourselves second. But I mean, not everybody's family structure works that way. It's just something to think about. Any other questions?
I want to say that's cool. That was like a really cool answer, and it made me like think about your work in a really different way. So thank you.
I'm trying to figure out how to make this into a question, but it'll at the very least just be an observation. but it's interesting that all the colors that you chose, like for the first line of all the Altheas, except for maybe Noir, are like grounded in like minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Which because I actually didn't even realize like those were colors, because I didn't know rutile like would be like represented as like a color, or like sable would be like a color. So it's really interesting now hearing that like they're meant to be colors, but then like also, yeah, like what does it mean that like you're referencing a color that is also a mineral slash material? It's like another thing of like that you're referencing like the digital and like the real, I guess, and like how those are kind of like what is it grounded in, I guess.
Um, well, I really appreciated that the words that I had to use for colors were a material based thing, especially for words like sable. Um, Sable isn't just one color; it could be either, because it's representative of an animal, and the different gendered experiences of that animal are brown and black. So they could be brown or black. It's not trapped in one color, and that's like that was a happy accident, because remember, these are from Scrabble games, but that I'm playing with queer people. So we tend to, I don't know if it's subconscious or what, but and then like rutile is an inclusion generally in quartz. So like it's often found as like something that is not a defect, but like because people seek it out, but you get a quartz crystal and there's a red vein of the other crystal that's um, threaded through it. So there is the threading through or the piercing of another object in that relationship, and it's red. So there's like things that are sometimes red, sometimes other colors like gold, but it's mostly red. So you can think about how piercing and blood. These were all happy things that when I'm creating the poems, I'm looking up every word, because they're not necessarily words I use every day. So I have to make sure that they fall in a way that moves the poem forward in a way that makes sense.
Thank you.
I if you don't mind, I had intended on reading them, but my cue cards got all messed up. So if you would like to hear some of them out loud. I will read my favorite 3. Noir, late lid, round raw ruts, hoar begum bad, chi. Bias, tyke sulfige, grunt to wax, is woo or ooh wilted. Gold radio snot, lit tonetic coda, prodsum, gay busy, foe. Thanks. Let's see. There's a chat. Chingy, thanks. Gold radio snot is one of my favorite lines. I'm curious, what do each of you all have a favorite that you like of them? This is the time where I ask you questions. No favorites? Okay.
You have to give us time to go look at them again.
Oh, okay.
I really like the image of the last one of the rutile Alphia.
Yeah, that was what's interesting is that was the first image I made of the 7.
I'm going to tell you my favorite, but in a question way, which is not really. I'm curious if your kids saw this and what they thought, because if you want to share that, because I thought what was really interesting is when my kid Ava saw this, he had a very strong reaction to your piece. And she had favorites and she had thoughts on it, which were really different and interesting than how I thought about it. And so being that this piece is about like queer motherhood and children, I'm curious about the feedback of children within this work as well.
I'm not sure if they've seen it yet. I haven't been having a easy time communicating with my kids over this COVID-19. Part of me thinks it's because their world is more on screens than it was before. And they're experiencing school from screens. And I do communicate with them, but it's usually in like really short, brief periods of time. So I'm curious, but I'm also like I'll find out eventually.
Well, I'll get Ava to tell you her thoughts on it. I just think it's really interesting, specifically around pieces that have to do with parenting, about how children read work differently and sometimes really insightfully in ways that we wouldn't think of.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to hear Ava's opinion. That would make me really happy. I guess Chingy's is the favorite. Favorite is the one with epidote. Epidote. And their favorite pairing is the one with bias. Interesting. Head and okay. And yours is head 0 wills. Okay. It's funny how like I created them and they're not like on the tip of my tongue. So which one is that? Head 0 wills. Oh, that one. Yeah, I think that one was the one with the mud balls is something that really encompassed childhood for me, because I was a kid who made mud balls and mud pies, and spent a lot of my childhood in the mud. So, well, thanks everyone for coming. I think that's the show for today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cassie. And if everybody will join me in a round of applause. Thank you, Cassie, for your talk, and thanks for your work.